Without further ado, let me introduce our wine guides and then they'll begin our journey. Jasper Dixon was born and raised in Northern California. His father was a home winemaker who would take Jasper along when he would go wine tasting. It was there that the seeds were sown, the smell of fermenting wine, the vibrant greens of surrounding vineyards, all made an impression that would last a lifetime. Soon, Jasper moved to Los Angeles, met Juan Alonso, and fell in love with the Alonso family vineyard. This, combined with a deep dive into Los Angeles's forgotten wine history, convinced him that the city could have and deserved to have its own local wine. Amy grew up outside Cincinnati, Ohio. She moved steadily west over time, pursuing a career in public policy and healthcare access. Along the way, Amy fell in love with wine and became obsessed after volunteering with California winemakers during harvest. She decided by the end of the first day that nothing was more fun than cleaning wine barrels, shoveling grapes out of a fermenter, picking fruit in the earliest hours of the day, and spending countless sober and not so sober hours with the soulful, hardworking types who gravitate toward the winemaking path. Thank you guys again so much for partnering with us, and let's get this journey started.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Cheers.
Happy to be here.
Thanks everyone for joining.
And thanks to everyone that's watching right now. We appreciate it.
So we have a very tiny 1,500 square foot winery and tasting room located in downtown Los Angeles, specifically in the what's called Mission Junction neighborhood of DTLA, probably more commonly known as North Chinatown. And in this space, we make wine. Our focus, as you guys will hear as we go through the presentation, is locally grown LA County varieties. So we do all of our production right here on site. And then we also have a small tasting room that is normally open on Saturdays and Sundays. But of course, right now, given the circumstances we're in, we're doing pickups instead, wine pickups instead. Anything about the space?
No, that's good.
You
got it all.
Yeah, next slide. Yeah, so there's a little picture of our tasting room back when we could have between 6 feet and 0 feet between people.
Yeah, remember those days?
We'll get there again. In case you were wondering, Jasper and I are 6 feet apart. It's just a filter on our computer.
Yeah, it's a visual effect. It's the magic of the movies.
But yeah, we really miss everyone. We look forward to meeting you, and if we have met you, seeing you again in the tasting room when we can. Next slide. All right, you can start with this?
Yeah, so just to kind of give an intro about Los Angeles and its history with wine, LA is a city that has so much different history and so many different aspects of life and culture and so many different stories. And so wine is something that was the founding aspect of, or one of the founding aspects, I should say, of LA, but has since then been totally forgotten. And LA was actually the birthplace of winemaking in California. And this is decades before Napa and Sonoma and everything moved up north. Originally, everything started here.
And the picture here is Zanja Madre, which is actually a wine that we have here at the winery. And the Zanja Madre was actually the original aqueduct or water source for Angelenos back in the mid-1800s. And it's how all of these winemakers that we'll tell you about in a bit used to get their wine, or their water rather, for irrigating their vines and washing their instruments. And it was located actually right across the street from the winery, which is why we have a wine called the Zanja Madre. And so if you guys have ever been to the State Historic Park across the street, it's beautiful. It's closed right now, but it is beautiful and it will reopen. You can actually see a little sign that says Zanja Madre, and this picture is what it used to look like. And there used to be many winemakers where our winery is today.
Yeah, here's a fun slide from back in the day. So this is, I think this is from the early 1900s or late 1800s. And this is a little area for those of you familiar with downtown Los Angeles. This is just east of Dodger Stadium where we're located, a little area called Mission Junction. That's just north of Chinatown. And where we have the blue arrow there, you can see that's actually pointing where the building where our winery is today. It's a different building than what was there in that photo, although that little building that looks like a nice big piece of red velvet cake, that actually is still here, believe it or not. It's pretty cool. It's the oldest standing industrial building in Los Angeles, built in 1892. And that was a big train station right there that was called the River Station.
And if you walk around here, you can even still see pieces of the little, of the railroad. little piece of the railroad. Yeah, next slide. Okay, so how did winemaking begin in Los Angeles? So you may have heard before of Father Junipero Serra, who came to Los Angeles in around 1777 and settled in this area in Southern California. Many people think that Los Angeles was the first place that vineyards rather were planted, but it was actually the very first vineyards were in San Juan Capistrano, right around 1777. 1781 are actually probably the very first vineyards here in LA, and it was at the San Gabriel Mission, which is up, still exists, and you can still go visit it under normal times. You can still go visit it. And that is where there used to be over 160 acres of vine in Los Angeles, just at this mission alone. So while San Juan Capistrano, which is kind of down towards San Diego, was first, we were actually the largest, and we were known for making the first kind of quality wine. It did not take long, actually only 3 years, for there to be non-secular or non-religious vineyards. And the very first non-secular or non-religious vineyard was actually Jose Maria Verdugo, whose winery was kind of right around where Golden Road Brewery is. So if you guys have ever gone to that brewery, it's kind of up by like Glendale area. That was the first non-religious vineyard in Los Angeles. And
we base all of our directions around where you can buy alcohol and drink alcohol in other places. So
we will reference.
It might not be helpful for some people that are not in LA, but yeah, if you Google these breweries and drinking establishments names that we mentioned, they'll definitely come up.
Very true.
Yeah.
So then all of a sudden there starts to be a lot of vineyards in downtown LA, and most commonly right around Alameda, kind of between what is now Little Tokyo and 7th Street. Those were all vineyards. In fact, San Pedro Street used to be called Vineyard Street. Next slide.
Yeah, just another thing about the missions too is that's part of the reason why this industry of winemaking and viticulture was established here in Southern California as a whole first, because all the missions started from Mexico and then worked their way up north, creating the El Camino Real towards San Francisco and Sonoma in that way. But everything started here in the vines and the growth, everything was established here first.
Yep. So this is a picture of 7th and Alameda. What would be the closest drinking establishment to 7th and Alameda? Probably Ixta Bar. Yeah. So
or ERB.
Or ERB, yes, Everson Royce Bar. So yes, this would have been 7th and Alameda. And if you look on the right-hand side of the picture, you see those dots, right, that are next to the cypress-looking trees. That's what the vineyards used to look like. So as we go through photos, wherever you see those dots, those were vineyards. And that style is called head trained. So today, kind of more modern winemaking or more modern vine growing is along these trellises. But back then they were doing these sort of individual vines that were planted and spaced apart. So those were the vineyards on the right. Next slide.
So
Jean-Louis Vignes. Okay.
There's a sweet dude. So this guy is named Jean-Louis Vignes. And vigne is the French word for vine. So, I mean, who knows if that was actually his real last name or not, or he was just really good in self-promotion. We don't know. But he was a guy that is credited at the moment for starting the first real commercial winery in California. And he probably wasn't the first one really having the first commercial winery, but the one that did it at enough rate that he was shipping barrels to San Francisco, to Monterey. Stuff was even going east. The first one to do it in a significant quantity that he really gets the credit for it. And his winery is called the El Aliso Winery, or was called the El Aliso Winery, and is about a mile south of where we are now. It's right where we have in LA called Vignes Street now. That's kind of by Union Station.
Actually, it's kind of by the brewery inside Union Station.
Oh yeah, exactly. And another good brewery called Boomtown. Shout out to our friend Ben. Fantastic establishment. Anyways, so Vignes Street, or named after him, Vignes Street, where that runs into the 101 freeway and Commercial Street, is actually right where his winery used to be. And you can see in the photo in the lower left, actually you can kind of just barely see it on the left side, but there was this huge tree. There was this giant California sycamore that was actually a religious place for the native Tongva people that originally lived there. Because it was, I think the report said it was 66 feet high and 200 feet wide, just like this massive, massive tree. And if you look at old photos of LA in the area, you can actually see this huge tree just shooting up out of nowhere. It's pretty awesome. And so he built his winery there to give it covered so it would kind of use the natural shade to help cool the winery a bit. And they called the sycamores alisos, so that's why his winery was called El Aliso. This guy, Jean-Louis Vignes on the side, yeah, the sweet looking dude on the right there. So when he was 41, he left everything he knew in Bordeaux. He was a cooper, so a cooper makes wine barrels. And he left everything including his family. It's kind of a rough move. And
4 kids.
Yeah, I mean, it's not an exact science. And I'm sure there's some people in quarantine that might want to do the same now. And jumped on a boat with a priest to the Sandwich Islands, which is Hawaii. So if you think of and this is like the late 1700s, early 1800s, and you're going from Bordeaux, France to Hawaii, that's, I think, literally the other side of the world, let alone just a totally different place and being and culture and everything. Like, it must have been insane. Anyway, so he posts up in Hawaii for a while, and he opens a distillery. I mean, like I said, pretty sweet dude. And he starts making rum. And then the next year, or the next second year after that, I think, the queen at the time just makes all alcohol legal. And so he has to shut down, and he jumps on a ship to Monterey, California, then makes his way down to LA in 1831 and opens up this winery in 1833. So it's a pretty crazy story.
Yeah, and if you see the street, if you've seen the street Vignes Street, that's right behind Union Station, or there's an exit called Vignes Street, that's pretty much where his winery was. And so really quick, the picture on the top left, we went to visit the grave of Jean-Louis Vignes. Jasper and I, when we were trying to start this winery, we applied to about 25 or so banks to get funding, and rightfully and smartly, they all turned us down. So we ended up applying for a loan from the County Development Commission and made a case about how we wanted to bring this culture of winemaking back to Los Angeles. And after we had that meeting, we went to this grave, which is located in East LA, Boyle Heights area at Evergreen Cemetery. And you can see it's just a very humble, very simple grave. And we cleaned it up, and we poured a little bit of the meadow on his grave, and then we drank the rest. And we got the county loan not too long after.
Yeah,
so we thanked him. Yeah, so we thanked him for it. Last thing about Jean-Louis Vignes. So he was the first commercial winemaker, but after him, there's kind of the succession of people who really advanced winemaking in LA. So Matthew Keller is somebody who starts really taking winemaking to scale, and he's just doing so much volume. You have his nephews, the Sansevin brothers. They start making wine at very commercial levels. And then you have Kohler and Froehling and all of these people who start really exporting it to New York and San Francisco. So really at this point, Los Angeles wine is on the map, not just in California, but across the nation. So next slide. Yeah, so this is a great quote that we found in this wonderful book, if you're interested in LA wine history, called City of Vines.
Super good book.
Super good book by Dr. Thomas Pinney, who's an LA native. He lives in Pomona. And there is no portion of the world in all probability that produces grapes in so great an abundance in Los Angeles. So just to give you a little sense of the volumes that we were doing, so in 1857, let me just spout out a couple dates and a couple numbers, but this is really, like, just think about this. 1857, the state of California is making 385,000 gallons of wine. Okay, 385, that's a lot of wine. It's a lot of wine, 385,000 gallons. Of those, state of California, 350,000 of those were being produced in LA. So it used to be when you would see California wine on a label, people knew that came from LA because, you know, that's where all the grapes were grown and that's where all the winemakers were. So that's 1857. By 1859, we are making 2.5 million bottles of wine.
Per year.
Per year.
And that's with a town of 4,000 people.
We were drinking a lot then.
A lot of sweet dudes and chicks.
That were drinking a lot. Okay. By 1880, winemaking has started to grow into places like Pasadena, San Gabriel, Anaheim, starting to go into Riverside area, Pomona area. By then, 1880, we are making 10 million bottles of wine. And by 1885, we're making 25 million bottles of wine here. All right, so when we think about Central California as being like a place where industrial farming happens, like huge volumes of farming, that's what we were doing in LA for wine. Like we were the epicenter of winemaking, pretty much for the nation.
Yeah, like Amy was saying, in the mid 1800s, if you saw a bottle that said California wine on it, that meant wine from Los Angeles. California wine meant Los Angeles wine at that time.
Right, next slide. Yeah, so you want to walk through that?
Yeah, so this is a really fun shot. This is an actual aerial photograph of Los Angeles, kind of looking at downtown, looking north. That I think was taken. There was a couple of these that they took with a hot air balloon, actually in the mid 1800s. And what's really cool, I think it's right. You're right, kind of at Main Street in the center of town there, on the left, sort of the left, just left of center, up from the bottom. And then all the stuff you see in the bottom right-hand quadrant, if you will, are all vineyard. It's all those little bush train vines like Amy was talking about, that, you know, instead of on a trellis system, like you see most stuff now, just they look like these little arms coming out of the ground with all the little shoots coming out. And that's what covers all that area and all to the river there. The little pathway here that you kind of see exiting in the lower right of your screen, I believe is actually what was the beginning parts of Alameda Street currently. And as you go down there, it used to be all the way from there to the river was all vineyards back in the day.
Yep. Next slide. Yeah, so here's just some fun old photographs. What you are looking at right there is East Los Angeles. I think, I can't remember exactly the street in East LA, but that's East Los Angeles. And again, you can see the kind of the head train vines in the back there. Next slide.
And then notice the citrus in front of the vines too. That'll come up later.
That'll come up later. Yep, that is San Marino. So again, those are kind of what I was saying earlier, those head train vines look like. So that's San Marino, kind of where Huntington Gardens is now, sort of around that area. Next slide. That is Burbank.
Burbank.
Yep, so those are women in pearls harvesting grapes in Burbank. And next one.
And what's really cool too, if you notice, you're looking through these slides, like in this one and the previous one. Oh, there's Bill's background. And the one with the guy in the top hat. Like these pictures were taken a long time ago in the late 1800s and the early 1900s. And these vines, when you saw them in those photos, they're already like very old looking. So you're like looking at photos of the vineyards that were planted starting that time in the mid 1800s.
Yeah. And this is the Lake Vineyard. So Pasadena became one of the most important wine regions in all of sort of LA County. So Lake Vineyard, you guys have seen or probably driven down Lake Avenue. So it was right along there, but really a huge, huge swath of Pasadena.
The Mag House, great place to get a cocktail.
Where?
On Lake Avenue, Magnolia House.
Oh yeah, it was very cute.
Yeah.
Oh, I miss bars.
Me too.
Too soon. Yeah, so Pasadena, that will come up later, but really, really important wine region for LA County. And yeah, this is kind of the inside of one of the downtown LA wineries. Those huge barrels are, I don't even know what those are called.
Yeah, those are gorgeous. So back in the day, a lot of the old big casks we used to have in California, they made from redwood. And nobody really uses redwood anymore. You can still find some older wineries will have kind of old ones as like a little homage to the past, but they're really just kind of beautiful, beautiful old casks. In France, they're called foudres. In Belgium, they call them foeders for the people that use them to make beers. But they're just really cool, beautiful casks. And I wish we could afford those. Those are sweet.
Someday. Next slide. So yeah, so this is just a very small example of some of the cities that had wineries or vineyards. Again, you can go to this book that we were talking about and get an entire list, but most of the major areas in LA County had either vineyards or wineries, or most likely both. Next slide. Yeah, so one really fun fact about LA winemaking is that winemaking was so important to this area that what you're looking at on the screen was actually the very first city seal. So when we incorporated it as a city, this is what we had as our seal. And the county seal was pretty much the exact same. Yeah. It's just the bunch of grapes was larger because county.
Yeah. And that's like, just to reiterate the point, that's how much the industry meant to the city and county of Los Angeles. Like that was the first major industry of this area was winemaking and viticulture.
Yeah, and there was a magazine, actually still exists, called Alta California, and that's where this quote came from. Nearly all the wine and the brandy made in California comes from Los Angeles County, which is no doubt better fitted in soil and climate for the culture of the vine than any other part of the state. So when people come to the winery and they say, oh my God, it's so crazy and it's so weird that you guys are making wine in downtown LA, we get to say, no, what's weird is that there aren't hundreds more of us. Next. Yeah, do you want to walk through that?
Yeah, so this is like another fun example for you guys to check out. As Amy mentioned, there's so many different streets and neighborhoods and areas and parts of Los Angeles that are named after people who made wine or grew grapes. And this is a very actually small amount of them that we had put together. If you guys know Allen Avenue, Boyle Heights, not far from where we are, a neighborhood just east of us, named after a guy named Andrew Boyle who made wine and owned vineyards all along there. Lake Avenue, as Amy was mentioning, in Pasadena. Mateo Street down in the Arts District, named after a guy named Don Mateo, who is an Irish guy named Matthew Keller, who produced a ton of wine. And a couple streets on here, the one called Mesnager Street, and then the one below it, Naud Street, and the one at the very bottom, Wildhard Street, are 3 streets named after winemakers that actually surround our winery where we are now. And we didn't know when we first got this space that was actually the case. So it was a really cool kind of happenstance situation on that. And actually at one point, this little neighborhood around this area used to be called Frenchtown because there was such a huge expat French population in LA at that time, and specifically where we are here.
Next slide. Okay, what happened? So we obviously are not making 25 million gallons of wine, bottles of wine anymore. So what happened? So let's start with Pierce's disease. Do you want to walk through Pierce's disease?
Yeah, so just to give you guys a quick overview of how we're going to break this down. So as Amy said, like what happened? You have this huge industry. You're making just millions of gallons of wine, literally, a year, and you're defining your county and your city off this, and then where does it go? How come now we don't hear anything about Los Angeles wine? Like, how's that?
Not nothing.
Not nothing, yeah. But next to nothing. I mean, it's really incredible. And so there were 3 things that happened. There were the main things that happened, and one was Pierce's disease. And Pierce's disease was this disease that was a bacterium spread by this bug that has the sweetest name in the history of mankind, called the glassy winged sharpshooter.
The best.
It's pretty sweet. And it loves citrus. It loves living in citrus trees. The bug itself doesn't harm the vine, but it carries this bacterium that harms the vine. And because of all the citrus that was being planted around, the population of these bugs just got huge, and they would go hang out in the vines. It's basically it's a leafhopper is the type of bug. And they would live in the vines. The bacteria would be transferred from them into the vines, and it basically kills the vine inside out. And it's something, Pierce's disease is still a problem, just like phylloxera is a problem, which is another important vine disease throughout history. And there is no real cure for it. So it still is an issue. And this started actually in Anaheim. It used to be originally called Anaheim disease, which now would have a totally different connotation. But eventually what happened is it made its way through that area. And honestly, Orange County would be called Grape County instead of Orange County if Pierce's disease had not happened. There were so many plantings there. In fact, Anaheim was originally a German colony based off of people coming, buying into the land and having to farm at least 5 acres of their plot with grapes. But so anyways, yeah, so Pierce's disease just came through, wiped out tons and tons of vineyards.
And it got its name because this poor soul from the Department of Agriculture named Newton Pierce came to Anaheim, was called by these growers in Anaheim, and then eventually in LA when the disease started moving up here. And so Newton Pierce came up to try and solve it, and he couldn't. He basically said, I think it's probably a bacteria, and he was right, but this is about as far as he got. And the poor soul got the disease named after him, which is just awful.
Yeah, it's probably not how he wanted to go out, but.
No, exactly. All right, next slide. So disease is hitting all of this land, and at the same time, you have trains starting to bring people into Los Angeles. I can't kind of underscore enough how much Los Angeles was sort of this like farmy, podunk, kind of like backwater town. I can say that because I'm from Southwest Ohio. So, you know, it was really, really just like a nowheresville. And then the train, specifically the Santa Fe Railroad, started bringing people from the east to the west. And
Southern Pacific. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Southern Pacific, yes. Well, to both. Yeah. And they, so all these people started coming to LA, and then go figure, they want to stay here. I mean, obviously, we don't, when we come here from podunk rural towns, we don't tend to leave. So, so all these people start coming in, and you start seeing the beginning of urbanization. So a lot of these vines are dying, and all of these people are coming, and the land sort of becomes worth more as all of the things that we come to expect, right? Like housing and roads and stores and all of basically the urbanization that we've come to know as Los Angeles. And this looks like, this picture is so funny because it looks like a little toy railroad, but it's actually a photograph of the Santa Fe Railroad going through Pasadena at the time. Just like an old crazy photograph. So people are coming. And there's a kind of a fun picture of urbanization happening in downtown LA.
Yeah, and the first part, like when we were showing you those previous vineyards, they were all by the river. They were talking about between being from Alameda Street in downtown to the river. All those were the first things to go with the urbanization and the spread. And this happened, the railroad connected in the 1870s. And it was like a huge, huge change for LA as a city, and especially infrastructure-wise. And then here, so this is the third of the three-pronged approach. As we mentioned, first there was Pierce's disease, so really bad vine disease. Then there was the urbanization that was happening and continued to happen exponentially. And then Prohibition.
Not good.
Yeah, that's not ideal. That's
so
not
Prohibition
ideal.
started in the state of?
You did the research. I don't know. Tell me.
Ohio.
Oh,
Portland, Ohio.
Oh,
so
shame.
it started as the Anti-Saloon League in, I think, 1893. In any event, so going back to Pasadena. So the Anti-Saloon League, as many of you know, probably know, they start going into all of these cities and counties throughout the United States and getting, cities and then counties and then states to oppose alcohol. In LA County, the city of Los Angeles repeatedly rejected Prohibition. Shocking.
Cheers for LA.
Repeatedly.
Good looking out.
Other cities around here did not. Pasadena voted it in. Sierra Madre voted it in. The city of Compton voted in Prohibition. And so it was kind of this patchwork here of where you could buy and sell alcohol. In 1874, the California State Supreme Court said, you know what, this is not up to the cities. Like a city doesn't get to decide Prohibition. It's not up to the cities. It has to be all or nothing in a state. Around that time, maybe actually a little later, 1913, the LA County Board of Supervisors decides, you know what, we're gonna stop approving all licenses for wineries. So we are not going to, when anybody wants to make wine, they have to actually not get one permit, but they have to get 13 different permits from the county. Not terribly unlike what it's like today. But as you can imagine, many wineries could not obtain the permits. So LA at that time went from 700 wineries down to about 100 wineries. And some of those wineries, for example, San Antonio Winery was one of the ones that survived. They got a permit to make sacramental wine for churches. 1917, Federal Congress, takes it to the states, passes a law that says we're gonna take this to the states to pass as a constitutional amendment. And in 1919, the states ratify it. So kind of this, as Jasper was saying, this sort of trifecta of the vine disease, the urbanization, and then prohibition was just kind of the nail in the coffin in LA. So next slide. Yeah, so prohibition ends in 1933, and you would think that, oh my gosh, prohibition is over. Like now all these wineries can start making wine again. And they try. Many wineries start back up in 1933, but the equipment is destroyed. The buildings are in disrepair. There's been no kind of institutional knowledge passed down. I mean, there's no like winemaking school, right? Like there's just like these a generation of people who would have learned winemaking ends, and really kind of some of the only winemakers that sort of have any wineries that kind of stay any sort of amount of time at this point are Italians, which is why a lot of people think that the first winemakers here are Italian. They weren't. They just were some of the ones that sort of had longer lasting wineries after Prohibition. Last thing I'll say about it is that around here, there were many wineries, in fact, right across the street from us, that kind of came and went in this sort of 10-year period of time. But they just kind of couldn't get going again. And
well, then what happened, right? After, you have Prohibition repealed and these wineries starting up, then you have the Great Depression as it's going through all this. That did not help. Yeah.
Yeah. So it just kind of starts to peter out here. Next slide. Zona Madre.
Oh yeah, this is actually another shot of the Zona Madre.
Today?
Roughly translated as Mother Ditch. Ditch with a D is what Amy likes to say. At least you get confused. And yeah, this is actually from about 1,000 feet just west of where our winery is now.
Next slide. And here's what it looks like, the old Zona Madre. So this is kind of what's left of the LA wine history, that and, just the street names and that were named after all of these old winemakers.
The railroad tracks that you see here, actually it's the Gold Line Metro that goes through this area. And when they were building the Gold Line, that's when they actually uncovered and found the remnants of the Zona Madre. There was some documentation about it, and they were wondering if they might run into it when they were digging, and they did. So it's kind of fun to have that artifact there.
Yeah, next slide. So where do our grapes come from? So you want to talk about Juan Alonso?
Yeah, maybe I'll talk a little bit more about, Jamie gave us that really nice intro, but just to give you guys a little more about the winery and about us. I used to work at a store here in Los Angeles called Silver Lake Wine for many years, and that's where me and Amy met. And eventually we became good friends, and then started wanting to have this idea of opening a urban winery here in Los Angeles. And urban wineries is kind of a fun idea. It's not something that's new, actually. It's pretty old. Back in the day, a lot of wineries used to be in the city areas because that's where the customers were. And then the vineyards, and it's also where the shipping points of interest were, and being able to ship stuff out freight via railroad back in the day or whatever. And the vineyards would be out in the country, and then you would bring the fruit from the vineyards into the city to produce the wine. And so we wanted to do a winery here in Los Angeles. And we started that idea and getting things rolling in 2015. We, for a few years, we would pick our fruit here in LA. Our focus is local Los Angeles County vineyards, and we would drive it all the way up to a good friend's winery in Northern California that's called DeRose. And that was just a pain, for lack of another phrase, to pick. We actually pick all of our own fruit. So we would get up at 3 a.m., go down to the vineyard, pick all the fruit ourselves, drive it up 6 hours north, then do all the processing, and then drink mezcal cocktails pretty much so we fell asleep. So we were just super excited when we finally found our own space here in LA. And we opened this space where we're at now in 2018 and started making wine here, and then just opened the tasting room the middle of last year in 2019. And the photos we have now are of the Alonso family vineyard, which if you guys are familiar with Los Angeles County, it's North LA County, just outside of a little town called Agua Dulce. Or if you know the probably better well-known city, Santa Clarita, just east of Santa Clarita. And it's a little vineyard, it's very small, it's about 6 acres in vine total. And it's farmed by our good friend Juan Alonso, who we love dearly, who was our crazy Spaniard from Galicia in Northwest Spain. And what's really cool is he actually brought over all these cuttings of these different rare varietals, so types of grapes from Northwest Spain, and planted them here in LA County in the mid-90s. And so we actually have all these really fun kind of different rare Spanish grapes to work with. Grapes you may or may not have heard of, like Albarino, Trechadura, Laurero, Bodeo, Mencia, like all these really, really fun different types of varietals.
And on the left is Grenache, and that's actually part of what we're drinking here. So this is our Grenache Syrah Mourvedre from the Alonso family vineyard. And it's called the Sierra Highway GSM, Grenache Syrah Mourvedre, because the vineyards are right off the Sierra Highway off of Agua Dulce. And if you wanted to look it up, Juan Alonso is a French trained chef, and he has a really wonderful French restaurant out there called Le Chêne. And when we can all again go out to restaurants, his is going to be one of the first places I go, in part because I miss Juan, but in part because it's like real French food.
It's super, super good. Yeah, Le Chêne spelled C-H-E-N-E.
Yeah, we don't own
Really,
stock
really
in it.
good.
It's just, we just eat there. Next slide. Yeah, so that's kind of it. We just wanted to thank everyone and hope that we can meet you or see you again at the winery.